Hi, I'm the Science Nephilim. I normally stream on Twitch by the same name, and I'm a Bachelor's of Arts biochemistry major going into my fourth year of study and with minors in Japanese and psychology. And so, I want to give you guys a quick scenario real quick. So, imagine you're at your PC all day and you've been at it with good bouts of work as well as just sort of watching YouTube and hanging out with your friends on either Discord or maybe on Zoom even with the situation nowadays. Or perhaps maybe you've been watching some Twitch streams. And so with that, the day passes by and the sun starts to set into the dusk of night, and so does your body setting into bed. And so we all know what the feeling of falling into dreams is like. We go to bed, close your eyes, and we're bask in further darkness than what's already in our dark room. And our mind starts to wander until it starts falling into a couch shared by a close one, a loved one. Maybe we're having a discussion about buying a pet that they promised, or maybe we're at the park and we're just chilling out, having a nice day, or perhaps maybe we decide to go on a trip and we go skydiving, right? We have our parachute, we're hopping on to the helicopter, and we're going up into the Earth's atmosphere. And at the apex of the helicopter's flight, the instructor tells us to jump off. And so we start to go. We start to feel the wind breeze very rushedly against our skin, and we're screaming. We're having the time of our life. And so by the time we get closer and closer to the floor, aka the surface of the earth, we get the instructions to well, release our parachute. So we go over, pull the cord, only to realize the cord isn't working anymore. And so we're panicking. We're gonna hit the surface of the earth is inching closer ever so rapidly towards our body, and we're accelerating, and we get closer and closer. We're rushing down, we're screaming, and the instructor isn't there. Everyone's suddenly gone. It's just us alone. And next thing you know, right before we're about to hit the surface of the earth on concrete pavement, you rushes up in a quick panic. For most people, they be breathing heavily, and they would say they had a nightmare. Me, on the other hand, I tend to get a burst of ideas, and a burst of thoughts, and a burst of questions. Sort of what is, I guess, not really the meaning of the universe, but maybe I'll get questions like the Prometheus ship, or maybe I'll think about education versus regulation, nuances of certain intelligence, intrinsic motivation, mastery. What is the science behind all of that? What experiments can we run? What questions should we explore? And so that's what a sleepless night is for me. And that's where I grab friends to talk about stuff. So usually friends that are knowledgeable in perhaps many areas of study in certain fields. And I ask these questions and we explore them and we have a discussion, and hopefully by the end of it we reach either a conclusion or more questions to ask. Uh, Essentially at the end of it, we should all learn something. And so that's what I hope to share with you guys. I just hope to share these questions with you all and the journeys that we go about and we take on in our pursuit to learn more about life. Because we're all in this situation with life, and we all, in some of our moments, ponder these questions at one point or another. And so why not ponder them together? And maybe by the end of it, we'll all have a little bit of a sleepless night. So enjoy. So I'll go first real quick, just to sort of have everything off here. Start off everything.
Mm-hmm.
So people know me. My chat knows me as sort of the Science Nephilim. I am a Bachelor's of Arts Biochemistry major, currently in my second semester, my third year of study, and I mainly think I've had like this moral dilemma in the sense of like sort of thinking about the distribution of like genetic engineering tools and kits that's being developed nowadays as we explore further in the research of biotechnology, and whether or not that's something like we should do, whether or not we should regulate that. Well, of course we should regulate that, I feel like. However, it's sort of like the methods and sort of trying to find the balance between educating and regulation of such technology. So that's something I've had, and I've talked about it with these guys, and I got their inputs about it. I think it'd be a really cool discussion to have with more people and more perspectives. So yeah, in this case, off my roommate.
Hello, everyone. I am a history and poli-sci major with a double minor in music and math. And I also agree that there's a bit of an ethical dilemma when it comes to understanding how to regulate the medical industry and the research industry when it comes to science specifically. There could be many problems, and there can also be many unforeseeable things that can technically be warned about, but unlikely, but still could happen. And it's something that we should analyze carefully. So I'll pass it off to our honorary crew member.
Yeah.
I'm very honored. My name is Carol Britt. I'm a neuroscience major here at Merrill College. I have a philosophy minor. I'm studying. I'm studying a couple of the psychological, philosophical applications, technology. I recently wrote a test about that ended up in this paper. So I'm fairly interested in these topics: technology, progress, how we handle these ethically. But my main body of work is adaptive neuropsychological systems, how they can have maladaptive interaction with things like technology and modern environment. So that's what I'm really interested in, the philosophical side of that as well as the psychological side. That's what I do.
Yeah, especially nowadays where there is research nowadays going into like things with technology and it being maladaptive.
It's very exciting. It's an incredible time to be involved in those.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay, so basically I think what I should start off with, hopefully the right foot, is sort of how I even like got to this topic in the first place. So basically one day I was just thinking about many things as per usual, but in this case I got from my advisor during my studying the senior thesis, it basically that one guy had sort of developed CRISPR kits that are distributable amongst the public, and I imagine that the guy, when he first made the kits, it's mainly for research purposes and education purposes. However, it kind of bugs me the fact that people can go online to websites and order a kit for some several $100s, and I'm like, that's like kind of available to anyone if it's online. And for those who don't know what CRISPR is, so CRISPR is essentially a genetic engineering tool. You have a protein and you supply it a genetic material sequence that you make in the lab, and that protein finds the sequence that you made in the cell that you put it in, and it cuts that sequence out, the one that you made and the one that the protein sequence, genetic material sequence finds, and the protein cuts it out. And so it's basically like a scissors, and there's like many versions of CRISPR, but that's essentially the basic idea of CRISPR, is that it's that.
Right. That's the technology.
Yes.
So with one of these kits, what's the most dangerous thing you can see someone able to achieve with one of these kits and the right know?
So the right know-how that requires, we actually get into the first bit of regulation actually. So, which is really deep in. So with the right know-how, that actually gets into ideas of biosafety. So my particular view, where my mind is skewing me towards, is engineering of viruses.
You could do that with one of the kits with the correct know-how.
You can do that with frankly, like farming them and like cross sort of breeding strains if you have the right lab and right environments. But if you have the right, that stuff is really hard. Realistically, right now, it's hard to do that, and it's gonna be it's gonna be under like heavy regulation, because
they kind of know how to do so. It requires just other steps. A kit in and of itself isn't going to get fine.
No.
Oh,
Well,
you're gonna need different equipment. You need other.
So I'll ask you this: what's the main dilemma here?
So it's mainly sort of like the main dilemma is mainly sort of like, you can have very like little amounts of people, but it's like sometimes the few screams the loudest sometimes. Sort of idea.
What's the point?
No, I don't follow. I think I know where you're going, but elaborate.
You're right about that general idea.
Yeah.
You know, the loud minority.
Yeah,
It's a good sociological principle.
Yeah, no.
But what are you applying it to, right?
What am I applying it to?
Yeah.
So it's mainly something like, and this is hypothetical, I don't doubt that it's very much realistically and statistically very low. Because I doubt they would even have interest in it. But who knows, the possibilities out there. But it's mainly more about
Possibility of what?
I'll get to it.
Okay.
Yeah. So people can get together, and whether or not, in this case, this is a bit more realistic, whether or not they have the best intentions of educating the public in genetic engineering, given that they don't have, given that maybe even they do have the right know-how.
I feel like you're worried about terrorists.
I mean, that can be part of it.
Yeah, that's a thought. You know, you don't want to give terrorists the ability to manufacture fires by giving them tools that direct alter the genome of organisms. Right? If I have it right, that's pretty much what CRISPR is. Take some genomic sequence, right, and cut a genomic sequence out of a strand of DNA, put a different in there with a kit.
And sometimes you can have natural cellular processes just anneal together, and what you have is just a cutout gene that is something you can also have too. On the other hand,
Move something.
Yeah.
Could you put something in?
you can put something in
Okay.
too. There's something called knock-in as well. So what I just described as knock-out process, knock-in is also another thing you can have too. And so, yeah.
These are terrifying powerful. In the hands of people who know how to use them. So there's an obvious dilemma here, which is, should the sale of these kits or the use of these kits be regulated? What's your take?
I mean, I think the dilemma here, right, is sort of having spread of education, right, of these tools is, well, it's great. It allows for, one, more manpower behind the research institutes to, you know, one, garner interest, but also to get more people like interested in exploring this stuff further. And it has great potential power for medical use, for example. Medical use, making proteins. So, for example, my medicine that I'm on is basically stuff that uses proteins to fight against my immune system or suppress it because it attacks my skin. And so, you know, you have more people behind that, you get more research behind that, and a lot of other things, including maybe cancer and such, could be addressed.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because more of these kids out there obviously means more education around them. More people can use them for educational purposes, and then there will be more people interested in research, more people with the know-how to be involved in labs doing this kind of work large scale, developing medication. Like the one helping you, I also think that's a great thing. So there are definitely two sides to the
And so the other side to it is sort of the fact that not all people have the best intentions. And that's when that whole minority can scream the loudest. In this case, in terms of the effects that they can cause, especially if they're not, especially if they
high probability.
Yes, but never zero.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, okay, so when we're talking about the probability being low, we also have to talk about what's the minimum, what's the maximum impact reasonable from one event, right? So someone does something dangerous to one of these kids, how great can it get? Which was my original question. Like, what's the most dangerous thing that someone can do with a kid like that? It seems that you could do some fairly dangerous, correct? Know-how and bad.
Think COVID.
Okay, well then I don't think we should give this kid to people. And the reason why I say that is, let's say you give out 1 million kits, right? And the probability of one of those people, using it with bad intentions, like 1 in 1,000. Let's be very generous about people's morals here. And curiosity could be doing that, not malevolence. Ignorance could be doing that. Someone could get very unlucky and make a virus more dangerous. Things like that can happen. Basically, if you give out 1 million of these kits to people who kind of know how to use them, and the worst that can happen is a highly infectious disease that starts a pandemic, then we don't want that. We don't want that, because just by virtue of the numbers, something's going to happen.
The thing is, though, is we already have thousands, uncounted number of different man-made viruses, or I should say engineered already, pre-existing viruses of variants, because COVID is a variant of something that's already SARS. We still have lots of it, and we need to. Complete opposite side of things. We need to, as a species, explore these things and create other variants in order to understand it better. It's a part of the process, and sometimes it's okay. Now, that's a matter of it being in the right hands. And I'm not sure it's appropriate to say that it wasn't in the right hands in China. It's that it happens, and it could happen, of having a spill, a leak, so to speak. And I think that's what happened in China. I don't think it was intentional. What gain could the Chinese government possibly have?
Right, well, I did mention both ignorance and incompetence.
And I agree.
I should have added incompetence to that list, because I think that is what happened. I agree with you that it wasn't intentional. Let me give you a bit of a timeline here for the whole Wuhan lab thing, which is now the kind of accepted theory of what happened with COVID.
Most circles,
in 2014, the National Institute of Health they put a moratorium on gain of function.
Yes, this is true.
And then on 19th of December 2017, they lifted that moratorium under the guidance of Dr. Fauci, essentially the research head for the NIH on infectious disease. Funds all that research. He decides where the funding goes for infectious diseases, including coronaviruses. And then the NIH, after they lifted that moratorium, funded the research in Wuhan that was being done on gain of function on that coronavirus. And then the leak happened. So now that's not saying that it's intentional, but it is saying that's really stupid. So, and Wuhan lab failed a CDC lab safety review.
A guideline.
I think it was in 2016. And the CDC gave them 9 months to fix that. They went back and checked, and they hadn't fixed that, but they could still do this research, which I think is also negligent part of the CDC. So there's negligence that can happen. There's ignorance. I don't know whether it was ignorance or negligence that played a part in coronavirus. Probably a bit of both. But in what you were saying about the fact that we need these kids, we need to explore in this space, we need to create these things in order to learn more about them. I think we can say, I think I agree with you, but not yet. Cannot do this yet. The reason why is we don't know enough about the viruses that do exist to be making more. There's a lot we don't understand. Think about it like this. Think about these three situations. It's an analogy I love to use. You've heard this before. Let's say you have a plank that's floating on the ocean. You have 100 rats and you put them on them. Well, because rats don't know about center of gravity and everything, they're all going to walk randomly and the plank's not going to sink. You take 100 lay people and you put them on the plank, they're going to panic because they know about center of gravity. They know a thing or two about physics, and they know that if they don't balance out this plank, they're all going to sink and die. So, but they're all going to either run to one side or run to the middle of the plank or run to the edges, and the whole thing's going to fall over. They're going to sink. But you put 100 physicists on that plank, maybe they all sit down because they know if anyone moves, the person at the opposite side of the plank has to make an opposite movement. Otherwise, the plank sinks. So there's this danger zone in between ignorance and enough knowledge where anything you do that has power behind it in a specific direction is going to tip the thing and put everything upside down. And it's a bit dramatic, it's a bit extreme, but it gets the idea across.
What does happen?
Mm-hmm. I think this is what happened with COVID. We knew enough to make a virus that was more deadly than coronavirus usually are, more infectious than coronaviruses usually are, and we didn't have the knowledge to be able to contain the alteration made to that virus, and we're all paying the price for that.
Yeah. Just for sort of like people, this doesn't take anything away from what I said. It's just sort of to be, in a sense, just scientifically accurate. It's like just more like SARS-CoV is sort of the virus that they took from,
Yes.
and edited basically, or I don't know if they edited or not, but something happened within the lab, and it mutated, producing a more infectious, more spreadable like virus and such. That's just basically that, and doesn't take away from anything from what you said. But yeah, that's right. Like there is sort of like this sort of in a sense seesaw deal with incompetence and knowing
Well, that's a matter of balancing, and that's what regulations are for.
Right.
And a lot of thought, especially, from a political standpoint, a lot of thought goes into how these things should run. The world isn't a movie. It's not as, governments aren't as greedy as people like to claim they are. They certainly are, to layman's terms, but they're run by other people. They're run by people like you and me.
Right.
And they think about these things more so than we do.
Yes.
And it's a silly notion to say, oh, they're so greedy, look at what they do. They did this on purpose.
That's definitely ignorance there on the side of other people who don't know.
Yeah, and it doesn't work that way. It works that way for movies and books, maybe. But not in real life. It's more complicated than that because it's real. And regulations are put into place, but sometimes things just don't work out. My parents are nuclear physicists and engineers, and they're always messing with regulations, etc., and working around it, and there are still problems with regulations. For example, in Pennsylvania, not too long ago, I believe 40 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, plenty of regulations for a nuclear power site of ours, but things happened and we almost had a Chernobyl on our, even though we had far more regulations than what happened to Chernobyl. An example, but I do think when it comes to intentions, it's almost a 0% when it comes to those wanting to create it for the sole purpose of, being a bioterrorist. There have been many bioterrorists before. Let's take in back 2001 and 2. Oh man, they mailed it to a bunch of senators and people in government and other people. Some so I believe type of fungus or something that's really, really deadly. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know actually, but
You know what I'm referring to?
No
I
idea.
forgot
Yeah.
what it's called.
But
yeah.
And that's an example of bioterrorism, and it's really, really rare, and it's stuff to...
harder than making a bomb.
Yeah, it is much harder than making a bomb, and the reward for a terrorist, if you want to call it a reward, it's certainly there, because the risk is huge. If a bioterrorist is successful, then that's a big deal. More so than a bomb would be, unless it's a suitcase nuclear bomb.
Right.
Yeah.
And something like that.
There's always
But still,
the worry of exposing yourself to it.
and as well as affecting you.
Yes.
The problem with chemical warfare and biowarfare are not mutually exclusive.
No.
But the difference is between a bomb has a certain yield. It stops at a certain point. A virus tends to keep going wherever there's a life.
Yeah.
And it's for the most part unpredictable.
Right.
And many countries have little to gain from destroying the world itself
Yeah.
with a deadlier than life virus, and COVID certainly was not that.
Mhm.
COVID was not the Black Plague. COVID was the worst thing that we've seen in recent memory, yes. But we were lucky and very fortunate enough. I can tell you just how bad diseases go back in history.
Oh yeah.
And we got lucky. We got
When-
lucky with this one.
Especially with like even unintentional introduction of diseases too.
Yes.
That like wasn't like basically the black plague was
Not
something
just the
else.
Black Plague, but there's
Yeah.
yellow fever, there's Spanish flu,
Yeah.
which isn't really the Spanish flu, more of an American
Yeah. No. It's
flu,
it's.
but we called it that anyway.
I think like an interesting like an analogy too, along with nuclear stuff. I remember you bringing it up. We were first talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
but just like even how is it in like quite literally in almost the most literal sense, exploration itself could be dangerous because of mainly historical reasons.
Yep.
When people went out when new cultures started like sort of, I remember something along the lines of like when people from I guess was it England or the English lands started going over to
Well,
to
when
North America.
Europeans started
Right.
colonizing and started exploring, they wiped out, I don't know the percentage, but definitely more than 50 of the Native American.
90%.
90%, yes.
Of
With-
the diseases they carry.
Yes, and it was a ghost land. What was once a thriving continent of peoples was a shell of its former self. There are plenty of historical accounts of Europeans walking upon cities of bones and decayed corpses.
Right.
Not really cities, because many North Indian Americans did not.
Right.
Bill, but you get the point.
They didn't have cities, but there were
They did, but
there
only
were millions. I can't remember the exact
yeah, there were millions.
number, but it was certainly
They had
more
their
than
visions of
20
city.
million.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
had their own. They had their civilizations, and they were
Their
in
land
ruins.
was
We'll put it that
populated.
way.
It wasn't sparse.
Because there were plenty of North
the
American
whole
civilizations.
vision of these small
Lands.
tribes of Native Americans roaming the American countryside looking for buffalo to kill. It's like it's completely unrealistic. They were everywhere. These were societies, and they were hunter-gatherers. They were
Many of them.
full-fledged- There were many of them.
And some of them were not at all. Some of them were permanent, and some of them fizzled out well before European colonizers came in.
Right.
But I'll take the Southeast Indian, the Pueblo peoples, for example. They had clay and stone home, and some of them they were the Spanish when they came. Many of them died due to diseases brought over that Europeans had built an immunity to, especially with the cattle and the animals they brought over, especially pigs and other species that would contribute to the disease. It wasn't just the Europeans carrying it themselves, it was the animals they brought over.
Okay, so Europeans, they've been in an arm. They had been in an arm race.
Yeah, this is
An
perfect.
evolutionary arm race
Yeah.
with these viruses, these diseases, for a long time.
I'm just putting things that I have in my head.
And that meant that the average European and the virus were doing this all the time. And then by the time they arrived at the Native Americans were down there because they hadn't been playing evolutionary catch up with the virus all the time.
Right.
And so when they got there, the virus's power was here, and they were here, and it crushed them. And a virologist now could have predicted that, but back then they didn't have any way of predicting that. They didn't know what was going on. But here's the thing: we can replicate what happened there with genetic tampering.
Yeah.
Because what happened was, through resistance and the virus is overcoming the resistance of the European herd immunity that we built up over decades to these viruses, there was the virus was solving evolutionary problems through the normal means: random mutation,
trial and error,
survival,
yeah,
natural selection. It was using these evolutionary tools in its toolkit to overcome the problem at a set rate. You could think of that as its successful mutation rate. Every time it overcomes a hurdle, it becomes a little bit more deadly. And then our resistance has to overcome the same kind of evolutionary hurdle. And because we're using the same machinery as the virus, we're head to head with it. And we keep progressing at more or less the same rate. But now you take that virus into a lab, and you know enough about its genome and the way that these viruses work. You can take a functionality from a different virus and put it in that one, which lets it overcome a massive evolution. You essentially make that virus what it would have been 200 years from now in its functionality, if it was lucky and developed that far. You're giving it a 200-year head start on you, and you don't think that's a bad idea. You're turning yourself into the Native Americans, and you're the Englishman who's going to kill everyone.
Same
well,
deal
the
with
Spaniard or the Portuguese.
the development of nuclear bomb, with nuclear technology. With the one time in here.
Well, nuclear engineering and nuclear reactors are not the same as a nuclear bomb. They're quite different.
Yeah, they're different reactions.
Follows the same. I guess more so the point of that, it's like they sort of follow the same. In a sense,
Are you saying they have the same? They have the
principles
same,
of function?
Yeah.
Same principles
They
of
are
function.
similar in that way.
Yes.
If you're a nuclear engineer, you could probably come up with an
Definitely.
idea to make a bomb.
Yeah. So yeah. It's sort of that analogy. Continue on.
Yeah. So we're giving these viruses an artificial power which they hadn't acquired evolution, so they don't have to do the evolutionary work to get that strong. We're giving them a free pass on the evolutionary problem which they would face in the environment, and then we're releasing them from the environment. Because how are you going to contain something microscopic? It's like you can put in protocols in place, you can make sure you have stringent cleaning programs, but it only takes one slip up. Only takes something sticking to the bottom of someone's shoe, or the cleaning apparatus not being fully functional on that particular summer day.
The sun itself.
And then
sometimes
yes,
it can cause mutagenesis, which for people that's causing mutations. That's generational mutations.
Reactor.
Yeah, I'm not scared of natural mutation. Okay, yes, so they can take us out for sure.
Definitely.
But there's a big difference between a natural chance mutation. Right, but there is a set rate of mutation that's average.
It's true, and we can predict that. That's what
genomes.
we do with certain flues.
Yeah, you can measure it.
Certain strains of things, we can measure it. Now it's in the off chance that it starts to go boom, 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 and we can't predict where it's going, what direction it's going to go in. Sure. We do have, our species is lucky enough to have the technology and understanding and know-how of how that can work. So it is,
I just don't like the idea of us playing chicken
Nor
with
do
artificially
I.
tempered viruses. Hey, can our evolutionary toolkit as biological
But that's where
beings
the ethical
catch
thing comes
up
in.
to a 200-year advantage?
That's where
Can it do that? With COVID, the answer was yes.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
yes. But what if the next one has COVID's
This is where the
lethality rate
philosophy
was like
comes in.
about 1%? What if the
This is
next
where the
one's
philosophy
lethality rate is
comes in.
10%? What are we going to do? We're not going to be able to catch up to that. If its lethality is 10%, it's just as effective.
And here's the
We'd be
thing.
dead.
Yeah.
Here's the thing too, is that
it also sort of informs education to explore further too, in a sense.
Okay, but
with
what
these
games are we
regulations.
willing to play for the sake of knowledge? That's the main question I'm
If I
bringing
may.
up.
Yes, that's
if I-
also
if
my.
We can play lots of games for knowledge, but we have to choose our games because we can't just play games because they are informative.
If I may
Mm.
add into that, and I'll be stereotypical here, and I'll add the history perspective. We always play games with knowledge and what we know, and throughout our history. And often it's not due to a malevolent reason. Often it's due to what it could have negative effects on other people. But the intention often comes from a place of self-preservation or preservation of one's own society,
Or just plain curiosity. We want to
or
know.
even plain curiosity.
Yeah.
And a lot of us want to play with fire because, unfortunately, Prometheus gave it to us. And now we are still fascinated by it. Fire. And we look at it, and
Look where fire got us now.
yeah, and we'll take fire, and we'll look at that as a concept. We'll use that as the pursuit of knowledge. Our species has always been fascinated with asking the question. The only problem is that we can almost never get the actual answer. We'll get an answer, but then we'll find that there is another answer to that answer.
Yes.
And it keeps going. It's cyclical from a third. Let's say if you're an alien and you're looking at us, you see us, and we're like, we figured it out. Actually, no, we didn't figure it out, because once we figured out fire, right? No, we didn't.
No, we didn't.
Fire is actually made up of different things. And
Right.
right behind me. And as a result, we then figured out that those things were made of more. And our pursuit never ends because it's seemingly infinite for us to process.
Right.
Right.
Oh, someone wants to introduce your guests.
Came in a little late. Could you perhaps introduce your guests? Yeah. So, these. Let's see. This is Rumi and this is a friend. We're both friends, and he's a history poli-sci major with minors in music and math. And then that is basically my cognitive neuroscience friend, who has a philosophy minor.
I'm Puro.
Puro.
Neuroscience
Mhm.
major,
I thought
philosophy
you were
minor.
double.
Just interested in things.
Double philosophy. I
Yeah.
thought he was a minor.
Well, it's a minor.
Yeah, well, he was still. I mean,
I
you
took
might
a
as
couple
well.
of classes.
functionally
They
a
gave me
phil-
a minor. I said, yeah.
It's
let's
functionally a
yeah.
philosophy major.
To be fair.
I think more about philosophy than I do about neuroscience.
That's
Yeah.
pretty fair, honestly.
And I think
Just
more
'cause
about
it's easier to
philosophy
think
than I
about.
think about
It is.
history.
It's honestly sometimes more interesting.
Yes.
In this situation, it's pretty interesting.
Philosophy,
Sure it-
every,
sure it is.
every aspect of education and liberal arts, just to hone this in, is absolutely quintessential and important to each other. They all have a function. It's whether or not you want to actually accept that it has a function, but they all work together.
Yes.
Science, math, history, English, even the studies that we think are fairly useless, such as
English.
if you're a native English speaker and writer, even that is useful because once you get into the linguistics of things, you then can explore the concept of meaning within philosophy. It all connects. And it's chemistry also connects with metaphysics as well, because we only understand metaphysics more so when we know a little bit more about chemistry. And like I always like to say to people, if you're a lawyer, you should know a lot of chemistry. If you're a chemist, you should know a little bit about law.
I figure we get into advocacy for
Yes.
this.
And then when you're a lawyer, you get to learn about ethics, and then you can combine it with science.
Yeah. Oh god. Okay. So hold up, my mind is leaving off the things. So okay, we got to the point of
Well, is knowledge first?
right.
That's the thing. Especially since you have
Yes, thank you for reminding
alternative
me.
means for acquiring this kind of knowledge. We can study fire that already have. That's not going to alter the ethos. And for me, we understand enough about evolution to alter its functional structures with
To a degree.
CRISPR and
Not
other
quite yet.
With fair
Yeah.
control.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
but we do have some control over those processes. And this is actually exactly my point. If we really understood something, and this is a functional definition of understanding for me. If we really understand something, we can change it at every level.
Yeah, but yes and no. Once you get into genetics, we understand it and can see it, but being able to tweak with it, we're not quite there yet. Or then cancer would not be an issue.
I don't think
That's
that
what
we
you're saying.
understand. I don't think that we understand, because to say we understand it, we understand how it
True.
manifests itself
Yeah,
in
yeah,
the structures we do understand, and what happens with those structures in the environment downstream. That's the part where we have very little idea. We understand somehow the basic functions of this, and then we fuse that with knowledge of the repercussions that messing with those things will have down the line.
To reiterate what you
We don't have
said,
that
and
knowledge.
to see if I'm correct in understanding you, I'll use an analogy. You have a chisel, like a cement chisel. There's a piece of cement. Let's call that the evolutionary command. We broke it. Now it's in all little pieces, but we can't see everything. And then there's chips and everywhere. We can see the chips. We can pick them up, but then how do we put them together? We can sort of get it, but we're not even. I don't even know if we can say we're even a tip. Knowing what I know about genetics, I don't think so.
Yeah, no. I've sort of come to this conclusion about genetics since with the fact that biology, one of its literal living functions is to adapt, that requires changing genetics. I'm always gonna say that genetics is always probably gonna be about progress.
Okay, unless we mess. Then it's not probability.
Even then.
anymore. Then it's intention.
Well, actually, it's still a probability because we messed with it.
okay, yeah.
That's the probability.
Here's the thing: is that with the probability part, is that even in experiments where we genetically modify things, I personally go through this because I'm messing around with them, like genetic wise.
He's not making a virus.
No.
Let's put that out there.
Wait a second. It's my senior thesis. It's something different. It's something really different. So here's the thing with the process of science, is that you go through a lot of trial and error, but the thing is though is that in journals it's presented as if it's like,
Fact.
if you're not
not
someone,
fact, but like concrete, if that makes sense.
yeah, if you're like, someone kind of getting into amateur science, most people who are like scientists get their education in science and they sort of know what the process is like, but sometimes some people translating that to like the public, it's like the reality behind what is usually said in a lot of public media with regards to science communication is that scientists like fail over and over and over just to get the right data for the experiment that they set up.
Sometimes they don't do
Yes.
that. Quota.
Yeah.
But that's we'll get into that later. But keep that in mind because that happened.
Well, that leads to a replication problem,
Yup.
right? Because then you're going to,
Bingo.
let's say you follow teacher experiment, get data one, publish it, and I think I heard somewhere that from 90 to 95% do not show the same results after replication, which is pretty scary because part of science, like you said, like not a lot of people are familiar with the methods and philosophy behind science and how it works. One of the core tenets of science is reproducing the experiment and getting the same result. If you can't do that, you haven't made a science go.
Even then,
Technically
though,
speaking, but if you
within
publish it and take it as science.
For example, like gravity, replicatable across everything. Then when you think about it a bit more, it's like that's replicatable across Earth.
And the universe, and then you get astrophysics.
yeah, and then
Yep.
exactly. Then you get an astrophysics, and then it's Starnight's a bit behind.
You're saying that a government body would create a virus for gain?
Wait.
Okay.
I'll Starnight.
I think.
Yeah, I'll address your question real quick. No, they can certainly, absolutely create it for some sort of gain, like a strategic gain, for example. Many claim, and this is certainly plausible. We've done it throughout history as well. Not necessarily with viruses, but we have done it in other ways. Let's take nuclear weapons, for example. That's the entire purpose. Moral, huge ethical dilemma, but it also, we did it anyways for gain. You can do it with viruses. And there were many still, fears with bombs, like igniting the atmosphere, for example. They thought nuclear bombs had the potential to do so. We know now that they don't. But with a a virus, for example, yes, they can. It can cause internal conflicts within other nations, and they can allow the nation that created that virus to have an edge. However, the problem is that China also bit itself in the ass because its own people were affected. With a nuclear bomb, you can nuke everyone else but yourself. You don't have to nuke yourself if they don't have nukes. Now, if they have nukes, then we have the mutual destruction. But when it comes with a virus, it's often hard to control your own virus because we're people, and it likes us. And we're its target.
Chemicals in general like biology.
Yes, and so it's a lot harder to contain.
Like, you can take this...
Yeah, and I agree. It is certainly possible.
Like I was, but I'm saying it's really...
I do think that the probability of it is fairly low. I think that governments, they're run by people like you and me. It is not some high Illuminati or anything like that. Kind of wish it was. It would make things simpler. But they do absolutely care about people. They're not greedy corporations in the way that you think they are. I used to think that for a long time. They are certainly greedy in comparison to the layman. Believe you me. But they are run by people like you and me. Everyone has a story. Everyone had a life, and most often they start at the same place. And I can't say I agree. I do think that they will make ethical decisions that will sometimes benefit them. But if they've ever read, we'll take Hegel,
or sometimes are just perceptively debatable.
For example, exactly. That's political philosophy, which is my whole thing. And they've certainly studied that, and they certainly know about it. And a lot of them, to us, to the layman, take Machiavellian terms into the way they approach things. They do not always what is right, but often what is necessary for them and for their benefit. But they do care about other people. They are just other people themselves.
Yeah,
they have their own problems and issues.
I just don't think they're that smart. Here's what's happened with COVID.
That I can agree.
We got a virus. We got a virus that was deadly enough so that governments could. You could argue whether it's justifiable, but regardless of that, we've accepted could have justified mandates and locking people in their own houses, making them wear cloth masks, which now the CDC even has said are not effective. There are these tyrannical measures. In Canada, we're seeing vaccine passports being put into effect, and anyone who questions those mandates get their bank accounts frozen.
Yes,
which has happened.
That's the greedy part.
Like, and for people who don't understand how tyrannical that measure really is, if I go around now and I start killing kids, the government's not freezing my bank. They're not doing that because
it doesn't directly
affect
them
in America. It's not within their purview of. And if you're getting your bank account frozen for political dissension, which that doesn't have anything to do with murdering kids doesn't have anything to do with my bank account, but neither does political dissent, right? So there's a weird thing going on that COVID's given governments a lot more power, and it was deadly enough for the governments to get away with increasing their power in that way, but not deadly enough to kill everyone. Do I think that because of that it was the governments doing it so that they could tyrannize their citizens? Absolutely not, because I just don't think they're that bright. I don't think we know enough about these viruses, and I've said it, to manufacture them in a way that you could hit that golden ratio. It just happened. It happened to occur that by some negligent research and safety protocols in Wuhan, we got a virus that was just deadly enough to give governments the ability to do this, and not deadly enough to kill all of the citizens in the process.
Yes.
So we got really unlucky as citizens. But I think if our governments didn't care about us, we'd be in a lot worse of a situation. Our situation is not ideal. Never going to be.
The government
could
itself
care more.
Got scared.
They don't not care.
Okay. And to answer your questions, Star Knight, you talked about corporations and businesses. Corporation businesses, depending on what economic system you follow, and also depending on what part of the world you're in, aren't always directly connected to government. Government often takes a position, whether or not here in the United States, I have no idea, where you are based. But in the United States, it's often the government's job, in a way, whether or not it's a conservative or liberal president, it's to have a way to intervene to some degree with businesses for the people. The government has a set of regulations that it can't act, against itself. That's what the Constitution's for. How do I explain this better? Businesses and corporations may ultimately want what they want, but the people at the top are still people. They will have their own interpersonal, at the micro level, their own philosophical views on people, but they are also people. And they do care, but they have to numb themselves sometimes for the sake of greed. Greed's a strong thing. It's a very strong feeling. And making a name for yourself, often, when you're as rich as these people are, oftentimes it's just about making a name in history, getting their name on the books, because they understand the world philosophically, or at least they like to think they do, etc. They're very educated people for the most time, those at the top. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think COVID could happen in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very afraid of that. I know here in the United States, in the CDC, we have our own a plethora of engineered viruses that could at any point, with just the unfortunate day, could come out.
Signed by UN, hey, we're getting rid of these.
Yes,
unless the government's being underground and DARPA or something.
And that's the thing. I will say also, as a history major, everything eventually comes out to light. And there are 100%, and this is usually for the sake of knowledge. Yes, military incentives, etc. Governments, they do lie. But they want to protect their people and themselves as well as humanity, but they also want to know, because humans have an innate urge to want to know.
Yes.
And we have I think you even know about this because it's a psychological thing. We have a a drive for mastery for things.
Yeah, well, it's part of some people's personalities in a very, very strong way. In personality psychology, we have industrious, which is essentially your will to master skill, which is associated with will to work hard and how much you enjoy work. Some people enjoy work, but I don't think that that's as much of a problem in this case, because whether or not there are people who want to play this game, now that it's an option, some and like you said, even if we ban this on a governmental level, let's say we ramp up all the regulations to the maximum, and we have this extreme case in our argument, right? It's let's see what lies on the extremes of this axis. So governments ban genetic alteration research, no exception. Even if it's not gain of function, just you don't mess with it. You don't do it. Well, people are still going to mess with it. They're just not going to do it with the government's money.
They'll find someone else's.
Almost like drug regulation.
They might go move to a different country. If your government bans it, maybe Japan's doesn't. Maybe South Africa's doesn't. Maybe South America, there are labs that allow that kind of research. If that's what you want to do, you're going to be able to do it. Even if it's not under the purview of a government, maybe you won't be able to publish research paper and things, but there are plenty of scientists who have a history of going rogue, getting really interesting scientific results, publishing them independently, and
some of the greatest thinkers of the last 2 centuries were in the academic community considered gone rogue. Now, not gone rogue and I'm going to engineer something.
They weren't in a jungle somewhere in someone's basement.
No, but they went against regulations and they figured out something. In fact, I'll use something at a very, very, very simple level. Washing our hands. Everyone hated the guy that figured out, maybe we should wash our hands after surgery. It's probably a good idea.
After giving birth.
And after giving birth as well. Maybe we should do that. And everyone said, no, you're a fool. Why would you do this?
Before surgery. That's also...
And it's clearly bad air. It's clearly the bad fucking air.
No, it's the air. You're right. It's what's in the air. And that's what people believed up until the 1830s and 40s. And that's a small example of going against it. So that leads to another ethical dilemma, because do you restrain the potential new genius of our society? because they want to go against the quote unquote regulations and say, well, I'm going to go against the thinking, but is it also to safeguard against the truly rogue and also ill-informed idiot that might create something terrible?
Right. Well, I'd say that we're talking about two different stakes
Yeah,
here
I can agree with that.
in games, in playing what I've called games, and they're not games, right? They're methods of exploration. They're
Something they are.
toolkits, right? But referring to them as game kind of gives a little bit more insight into what's happening, because you have something that you can play with, something you can alter and use this tool, and it can have very positive outcomes. But then there's also a cost, a potential cost you might have to pay for playing this particular game. So it's like you're at like a shopping market, you're window shopping for tools of exploration for the future of humanity, right? Let's say you're window shopping for those tools. And you go past a tool which is, well, we might be able to find, in the best case scenario, real cures to genetic disposition towards like cancer, autoimmune disease, these very, very serious things that affect millions of people's lives. But what is
Neurological
the
diseases
cost
too.
of that game that you might have to pay? Well, we might all die, right? And I've talked about this with nuclear weapons. Whenever the potential cost of something is the annihilation of humanity, it doesn't matter what the upside of that game is.
Yeah, but then again, a nuclear bomb could save us.
Well,
In the form of
we're
reactor.
stuck with it. Well, we're stuck with
Good.
it because here's the thing: we didn't do the philosophical thinking beforehand. And the moment one country has a nuclear bomb, all the other superpower countries have to also make a nuclear bomb, because if they didn't, that country would rule them by fiat, because they have the power to destroy them, and they don't have the power to destroy them back. So now we have mutually assured destruction, and that's kept us alive so
For the
far.
past 80 years, we've been doing fairly well.
We've been doing okay. We don't
You've been doing
know.
all right.
We don't know how.
Things are getting a
Not
little
sure
rocky
how
now.
we've made it this long, but
Me neither. I don't know.
know,
I don't
we're
know
doing
if
it.
we can survive
Heck,
like
even
500 years with nuclear weapons on.
give us
on the
3
planet.
centuries to figure it out, and then maybe we can say we're doing all right.
Okay, so we can all agree that we have a button that humanity can push to end the game. For all of us.
For the most part. I will say, to put a very practical point,
Okay, some of us might survive.
nuclear weapons. No, I will say, and this is just a hypothesis, but a highly regarded thing. Nuclear weapons would put us back pretty much to the early Victorian period in terms of tech level. And our world would not, obviously, it wouldn't look
Some people will
Victorian,
survive with knowledge, which is very important.
but humans
Some
would
knowledge
still
would survive.
survive. Nuclear catastrophes are often very not correctly portrayed in movies. For example, it's not a desert wasteland.
Okay, but I would really prefer
But you
for
get
us
the
not
point.
to be put back to the Victorian age.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
To lose the 21st and 20th century would be a really, really, really bad thing.
That would be really
the
crappy.
19th century was awesome. So
Great time,
we're
but I
gonna-
prefer 21st.
Let's not do that.
Give me my air
Is basically what
conditioning.
I'm saying. I'm saying a virus can take us that far, if not further. And
A
so
virus could take us
we
all
already
out.
have one button that says Victorian age on it. From your argument, I agree with that.
And then we have
kind
a
of.
virus that says Neolithic period.
Right. We might have. There might be a virus with that tag, and so we have to ask ourselves. We already have one button that's going to end the world as we know it. Do we really want to?
Unless.
No! No! Stop right there!
Well, if you're a government, then that's exactly what you say. If you're the NIH, that's exactly what you've already said.
Oh my god.
You know what I mean? Like, well,
No!
we don't want a button like that unless we do. Let's unban everything,
Unless
and then
we-
COVID
I
happened.
mean.
And it could have been a lot
Unless
worse.
the underground black market.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Oh, yeah. I will say.
That also goes into the thing too when we talk about sort of
Yeah.
going rogue earlier. There's gonna be people who like gather around to sort of literally avoid authority.
There are those
Black
personality
market.
types, yes.
Black market kind of
Yep.
stuff, dark web. That
Whoa.
place exists, and I
Seems weird.
easily imagine it happening, for biotechnology purposes, and there could be a whole case of like biotechnology black market underground.
True.
People don't know.
I think though, with tech like that, less of it is about underground, and more about governments. And as much as I've said about how I do think governments are human, and they're not these evil entities with no soul, I do think that there is a little bit of that, and by proxy, and have some sort of affiliation, perhaps, because a lot of it is in the pursuit of how can I protect my peoples to be more powerful than you. Nations have always ever been, unfortunately, just manageable groups of people, and we all have our own purposes within these nations, and that's what governments are for. And they will, by all means, do things to have an edge of some sort.
Yeah, what they can get away with, because
Exactly.
it's a system that balances itself. So, at least when you're in semi-functional democracy, I think we can agree that there's not a democracy on the planet that is semi-functional at this point.
Semi-functional.
But there
It's
is
its own
still
question,
accountability in terms of you can't go all the way crazy, even if you want it. I agree with what you've said in the sense that you have to give governments their due. You don't sign up to work for the government unless you want to serve people in some capacity. But there are some people who just want power. The governmental systems of the world are called the halls of power for a reason. And there are some people who want power and who just want to see the world burn. And as much as we like to pretend that those people don't exist, at least don't very powerful places, hierarchies of authority, government, and research programs, they do.
They do.
And sometimes they get the means to actually cause something that might burn the world. So maybe we shouldn't make those tools available.
Conspiracy.
But yeah, I'm not saying that's happen, but I could see it happen. I could see it happen.
Right. It's all about possibilities.
Yeah.
Right now.
Right, and like I said, even if the possibility of ending the game for all of us is 1 in 100,000 with a specific tool, why would we take that? Why would we say, "Oh no, this tool is easy to use. This tool is fine"?
The thing is that the risk
it's
is
gonna...
within our control, because if we're talking about risks, again,
yes, we could
but
take
we
the risk,
have
or
the
we
control
could not take
here.
the risk. That's the control.
Yes. And I doubt.
So what it's saying about taking control, just to bring straight
Yeah.
So we have control.
We have control of whether or not we want to do that. Now, there is the off chance that it gets loose, and we lose that control. I firmly believe that it would be not humanity's undoing, depending on how bad the virus is, but I do think it could be. And that's the thing. It could be, and there's really no answer for it other than, it could be.
Yeah, and what I'm talking about is not the probability of like you say, the probabilities in our control. I was talking about the probability that things got out of our control.
If they got out of our control, it's still that's high. That's high for anything.
Yeah, well, it is going to be, even if the overall probability of that per kit used, let's say, or per
that's still in our control
program,
though, because a person had to do it in the first place. That's a sociological dilemma.
Oh,
because
statistics don't discriminate.
Well, I know, but it's still a person that did it.
Ruthless.
I'm saying it's still a person that did it though. An animal's not gonna go look at the virus and engineer it.
No, because animals are like the rats on the plant. Animals don't know about evolution. But a
human does.
They're subject to it.
Therefore, it's in our control.
Humans do. Therefore, we're like lay people walking on that plank. We better hope that our actions have a pseudo-random result or the right result. Because if they have the wrong result, we can sink the ship.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. That's the cost. We sink the ship. We don't have the right response with these tools. We don't use these tools responsibly. I think giving everyone a tool like that is a really dumb idea.
And most people aren't going to be interested in tools like that.
Even if we know more in 30 years, we have to be around to know what we'll know.
I have a interesting and also this is going to be a pun unintended. You'll get why it's a pun unintended idea, but I have an interesting sort of comparison to this: firearms.
The creation of firearms is what you're saying?
So, for the creation of firearms, that happened in the history of it basically because it was an act. Someone sort of just
Yeah.
like did something to
You can blame the Chinese.
Yeah.
Again.
Again, bro, I'm part Chinese.
That's true, you're Han Chinese.
But anyway, so
It's
yeah,
your fault.
Does that give
People-
you license or something?
Yeah, does that give you
No.
license?
I can't talk
No,
about
I'm
the
just like,
Chinese
wait a
people, but
second.
you can.
No, I don't mean it like that. But it's just like, oh god, wait a second. That the implicit fingers are pointing towards me here. I'm like, wait a second, I'm not a part of this. I'm mainly Filipino. So anyway,
Wait.
not anything. So
We get your
major
point, go on.
respect to like Chinese people and those who are not the most well intentioned. Anyways, so.
You can blame their government.
So anyways, so like the development of like what is it? Basically the first instance of gun technology was through an accident. So it begs the question, it's like when we like do we really have control? It's more like we can say we have control now because we know most things in science is interconnected the whole
We have
bunch.
control of its creation.
I don't think. Well, I
'Cause-
think what Eli's bringing up is that
Mm.
do
Yeah,
we
explain.
really? Do we?
Yeah.
Because we have
That's what I
the knowledge of how to create it.
And also
And if we have the knowledge of how to create it and the means to create it, can we really prevent it being?
and also not to mention, and I'm pretty sure you would pick this up too, is that sort of at the quantum fabric of the world, things are probabilistic. Of course, that doesn't that no longer comes into effect when things are classical, like this. This is classical
Yes.
physics, right? So
Yes.
That
That's-
marker
that's
didn't have a
predictable.
probability to float off onto the moon, you know.
right.
No.
That probability is
Or
essentially
did it?
zero.
Because are we a part of that probability and we threw it in the moon, so therefore it's...
Yeah,
Okay.
it depends on what you include on the
Mm.
system. If you include
Yeah.
Elon Musk
And-
firing a rocket to the moon, which I don't put beyond him,
Right.
then yeah, the probability rises from
Mm.
zero. So that's when you're looking at the. It depends on the event you're looking at.
Mhm.
If it's the whole universe,
Mhm.
probably nothing ending up in a specific location has a probability of zero. But you say you drew this distinction between probabilities in the universe we can control and probability we can't. You know, in regards to the whole system. You brought up solar flares. We can't really do nothing about that. We can't block a sun ray if it decides to smite Earth.
Right.
That would be very unfortunate. We can't
That's
control
not
that.
Heck, volcano activity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are
That too, yeah.
geological things that could happen.
Yellowstone.
Mhm.
Comets, meteor...
technically.
No.
Meteors.
Comets are
technically.
still
Mhm.
they won't do anything.
Comets.
Most of the
Meteors
time.
hit the Earth. I
It's a
just learned
giant-
that.
Meteorite.
You get it wrong.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Nice.
So there could be a big meteor and gone. So there are these probabilities, and they're real probabilities
baby.
that we can't control.
That's what I'm waiting for.
I'm on the side of things where if we can still learn things and not increase those probabilities, that would be a good thing.
Mhm.
We are in control in some sense that we can sometimes not raise those probabilities when the other choice is good. But you bring up an interesting point. We're already doing this research. We already have the know-how. Now kits are publicly available for a few $100. Have we crossed the point of no return? It seems we have.
Mhm.
Because the point of no return with atomic bomb, I think we can all agree, was when the first one was made. Or when the first one was dropped.
Actually, I think it goes
That
more
really
down
sealed
to
the
the
deal.
idea. Just the idea, the concept alone is an issue.
So you think
Info
that-
hazards.
Exact. Okay, so the
Yeah.
the concept itself is where you draw the line of no return.
Mm-hmm.
Like once someone comes up with this concept and it's a realistic concept, like it obeys the natural laws within which to generate these ideas. Because if I come up with a bomb that destroys the entire world, it's like if I can't build one, then it's a moot
Can't.
point,
Hmm.
right? But we can alter viruses and can build nuclear bombs and have. So the moment you have a concept realistic, doable, and you're coming up with brand new technology, that might be the point of no return. But you can't come up with a technology like that without considerable research.
Yes.
So do we regulate future, like cross the point of no return with atomic bomb and arguably with genetic tampering. Do we, or should humanity, it's not like three of us have much control over this, but should humanity decide, okay, we got to stop until we understand the repercussions that might occur from a specific line of research, which is a very difficult thing to ascertain. But until we run something through some sort of protocol for ascertaining that, we're never going to get it 100%. But maybe we can stop the next atomic bomb or the next gain of function research line from being crossed. Maybe if we stop ourselves from figuring out certain things, that's good, because stakes are getting so high that we could end the game if we take a wrong step. And at that point, I think the game changes. You have to stop playing certain. You have to completely withdraw from certain lines of research and lines of experimentation. You have to walk a very thin line with your conceptual route. And you just have to say, we're not going to go there. That's wisdom. It's not knowledge, it's wisdom. And I don't think that humanity has wisdom to back up its scientific knowledge. I think we are hundreds of years ahead with our scientific knowledge, hundreds of years in front of our wisdom with our scientific knowledge. Do I think we're up to the task? No. Do I hope humanity's going to try? Yeah, I really hope we're going to try, because keep walking into these lines blindly, going, hey, maybe we should, mess with things genetic, which took 3.5 billion years and made us. It's like that's one of the most powerful engines in the universe. Let's mess with it.
To connect it
go wrong
to your point earlier, I do think that often, and I can't speak for any corporation, any person that's involved. My general assumption is that it's a shallow, and it's a negative word used out of context, but in the context that I'm going to use it, it's often with the intent of finding something new in knowledge, new knowledge. But the biggest problem comes with the lack of philosophical and/or seeing the grand narrative, the big scale of things, understanding the scale and the implications behind it. Often it's about doing whatever you can to find whatever it is you're trying to find, and then once you found it, do you start to realize,
the technology's still there.
What happened?
Right. The technology you use to get to that result, if you even attain the result after, that technology remains, and not the only use of that technology. I don't think people are going to figure that out. It's like, sure, you can alter genetics with the purpose of curing cancer. Maybe you cure certain forms of cancer, which I know genetics has already done. Like certain forms of cancer have been targeted, and the death rate of them. I know there's certain kind of cancer that mainly affected children. His death rate went from 85% to 2% because of this kind of research. So it's a massive difference.
Right.
And so there are these beneficial results from this kind of research. I'm not saying that the game is without upside.
Right.
I'm saying whenever you're going to engage some sort of, you don't have to not only explore the possible positive benefits, even if they are as extreme as curing cancer. Don't just explore those. By all means, explore them. Hypothesize about them. Say what your hopes are. But also evaluate, how bad is this going to be if it goes wrong? Exactly. And get specific about it. Because I think if the NIH did that with gain of function research, it would have never gotten a green light. The moment the analyses of how badly it could go wrong, they weren't put on paper, I don't think. Because if they were put on paper and were brought in front of those councils, and the council saw, okay, we could cure some cancers. But if things go wrong, we could all die, including every person on this board, and we could send humanity back to the Stone Age if it survives in a really, really bad case scenario. I think that if that was ever put on paper, none of this would have been approved, which means that process, cost-benefit analysis, wasn't properly run. Now we have a pandemic on our hands. Could have been a lot worse. We have nuclear bombs because America is more concerned with winning a war than future 150 years down the line. Um, and
It's so good.
yeah, you can argue,
Absolutely.
like, is that the right or wrong to do? I'm not taking a claim either way. Maybe the bomb was necessary, but the cost of it is extremely high if we don't handle it effectively. Like I said, we have a button that sends it back at least to the Victorian era, so we should be very careful.
Right.
Very careful, especially with, like, viruses, which are arguably potentially more destructive than nuclear weapons. Like, I keep messing with more and more dangerous things. The costs of our games are getting so high that they are becoming unjustifiable to play, but not really stopping any game. Can't understand why.
Well, it's for the pursuit of knowledge. It's for the pursuit of understanding something.
You need to be alive to know things.
That's true, but sometimes, what you know can kill you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you just gotta hope and really bet on that the majority of people want some form of self-preservation. Now, of course, you got nihilists,
I'm all for gaining knowledge. I really want humanity to increase technical know-how or technical ability. I don't want people to die of cancer. I want us to reasonably do to research these diseases and figure out what causes them, and figure out ways to stop them. But if we're going to say for the pursuit of this supreme good, curing whatever disease it might be, I don't care if it's cancer, AIDS, or whatever, for the purpose of the supreme good, using this to justify all means, we're going to do gain-of-function virus research. I don't think we can do that. I don't think we can afford to do that. It's too simple of a calculation. You can't just go, well, this good is so good. We're so virtuous for pursuing this that it can't possibly go. It's like, do you understand that species of viruses have made species of mammals go extinct many times in the evolutionary history of the Earth? And if we give viruses evolutionary free pass on problems that they would normally have to struggle to solve by pseudo-random means, we're giving them the upper hand on us. Do we really want to do that? Do we really want to play that game? Because now we don't have SARS-CoV-2 virus that's been altered in a way, or gained some sort of mutation in a lab, which perhaps it would have otherwise gained, right? We also have the Omicron variant it's not from South Africa. South Africa scientists discovered it. It was everywhere. We don't really know where it came from.
Right.
But we have the Omicron variant now, which it's like a different virus almost. It's of the same type. It has very, very different outcome. It's more infectious and it's less deadly. Could have very easily been more infectious and more deadly.
Which would have been the worst case scenario.
Yes, that would have been bad.
You got lucky again.
That would have been bad. But if you think about it like this, less infectious, less deadly, more infectious, more deadly, or a combination of those,
right?
You get this foursquare. So it's like of course it's not right because the probability of something mutating to be more effective is very low, but it's like a 1 in 4 if those are the outcomes. And obviously there have been mutated versions of this virus that have failed. Because in order to get one successful mutation, you have to go through something like 1,000 So, and I think this virus has a very high mutation. Am I right about that?
I actually don't know. I don't keep up with it, but yeah.
Then I won't speak on something I don't know.
Right.
But there are things that we don't know that we can't mess with unless we know very well. And those I have a fundamental problem with that. I don't care what you justify it. I don't think we can handle the cost. That's the cost at the end of that game. Like, who are you going to cure of cancer from? there's it there are certain costs that defeat the point of an enterprise altogether, no matter what the potential benefit that enterprise might be. And I think gain of function research is one of those enterprises. The potential cost of it makes it invalid enterprise. And I cannot believe after COVID that it hasn't been banned by the NIH.
Mhm.
They put a temporary ban on it, and now they lifted it again. It's like, have we learned nothing? Have we really learned nothing? Millions of people died. A virus got out of a lab with improper safety. That lab is still operational, still doing the same kind of research, and that research hasn't been banned. They put a pause on it, and now they've paused. It's like, what are we doing? What's humanity up to exactly? Do we want the game to end? Because it really seems like through ignorance rather than malevolence, we're going to end up there. Because cost of ignorance, it's not like fail at these games and pay the cost only if we're malevolent and want it. It's not how it is. Like, we wouldn't have fallen into your warfare. Here's an example. So there was this Russian member of the government. He was responsible for pressing the button that would trigger a
Talking about the false alarm.
Yes. What's his name?
I don't remember him.
Oh, but he was
It's cutting out a bit.
He was responsible of he was responsible for, I'll project a little bit better, for pushing the nuclear retaliation button for the Russians in the case of the detection system for nuclear attack going off. Simplifying it a bit, but that's essentially what it was. And there was a false alarm in that detection system. And that man thought that the timing of it was off. There wasn't any reason at that particular time for the United States to strike against Russia. So even though the detection system went off, he did not press the button that would have launched a nuclear retaliation. If he had pressed that button, Russia would have launched nukes at America, and we would have had nuclear catastrophe on our hands. So the systems that we build, even to contain these things, are never going to be infallible. Just like the systems we're playing with that result in these things are not infallible. Saying all of this just to kind of reiterate the point that there are some risks we can control, yes, but there are some risks we can't. We don't necessarily have to use these things malevolently for them to blow up in our face. And we have to, in the future, make cost-benefit analyses based on that metric. If we're ignorant and stupid and botch this whole project, whatever it might be, what is going to be the cost of that? Let's look very long and hard at that before we begin. And if that is the ending of the human race, I would say we don't do it. I'd say we draw the line there, no matter what the possible benefits might be. Let's take a more contemporary example. Fusion energy. It's coming along quite nicely. We haven't gotten a sustainable. Yeah, exactly. And everybody is. We're super excited about that. You could say we're as excited about that as we were on the cusp of breakthrough cancer research hitting the scene, let's say in the early 2000s, right? It's like people were really, really excited, and there were great things that came from that. But let's say through the course of research, nuclear fusion, we reach a point where we have to decide whether to go down a line of research which cost is similar to this gain of function research. Essentially, okay, if we botch this up by negligence or ignorance, we could destroy humanity, right? And I'm not saying that could happen with this technology. I don't know enough about it to know. From what I understand, it's not likely or not possible, right? Because if you don't contain it with a magnetic field, it fizzles out. But you're essentially creating a sun on the surface of the Earth. So that has to be somewhat dangerous.
That's Spider-Man 2 movie.
Right.
Yeah.
It has to be somewhat dangerous. But let's say, hypothetically, that it turns out to be so dangerous that it could send us back to the Victorian age, just like nuclear weapons can. Okay, so now we could have infinite energy or death if we muck it up. from my perspective, we don't go there, even though we could usher in a free energy society. If that's the cost, we don't go there. We bear the current limitations of energy until we figure out an alternative means to get where fusion would get us. We delay progress intentionally, perhaps for hundreds of years, in order to not cross a line where, if we're ignorant or negligent, we all lose, essentially. Because we know it doesn't matter what we know or how comfortable our lives are. If we all lose, we all lose. That's the end.
So what
of the
about
game.
regulation? About because you can spread that out as a science. We have to spread how we experience what we down, what we get off data, spread it out to others.
Or I would
And
say something
so-
confusing. I'm for freedom of information, complete freedom.
Right.
I'm not for complete freedom of science.
Mhm.
I think information. If you figure
Do I
something out,
detect a bit of con?
Right. if you figure something out,
Mhm.
you should
Civil
share
liberties.
that. You should share that with the world, because we could all benefit from knowledge that we gain. We could also destroy things with the knowledge that we gain.
Yep.
And so, but I think that
You have
you're looking at it
you want
from.
if you want to attack that question, you have to go into the society and how that functions. Some societies have different standards of, morals and different efficacies, etc. And there are some cultures and some civilizations throughout history where the pursuit of science is all, to a degree. Now, what their understanding of science is to them is different than ours. But the point is that, do we deny people an ability to go into certain sciences that could very well be good for us, even if they have a very potential negative side effect? How do we limit that? Do we explore it, like you said earlier? Do we explore the problems of it and the implications and the hypothetical implications, and if that destroys humanity or severely hurts it to some degree, do we stay away from it? What do we do? I don't know if we can, unless you go into the society and install an idea. So you have to. That's individualism. That's different. That's a whole different moral dilemma. Yeah, this is just
I
one.
see it from a hierarchy perspective, which is going to make it a lot more socially amiable to introduce this idea. Because what I'm doing in
Guess like the
my
questions I'm
argument,
posing.
I'm essentially
Yes.
I'm putting things in a certain hierarchy. I'm saying life has to be served by truth. Always. Knowledge, curiosity, always has to be subservient to our existence. And any knowledge that might come at the cost of our existence should not be attained. I believe that. It shouldn't be gone after, it should not be attained. Because if you flip the hierarchy, then we can end up in the situation we're in now. We can end up in more of them. We can end up in so many of them.
Well, then I guess I have to give up my knife that I like to use for my butter.
I got a dilemma. So,
Because that can be good. Also,
how much do you know about
Immune? A fair bit. Not as much as you, probably, but
So,
I'm not far into it.
yeah. So things like transplants
No pun
would
intended.
God. Things like transplants would definitely pose a very good dilemma for you. I'm honestly at this point I'm like posing or like just being like moral dilemma central here, but what is it? Sometimes when some medical cases, just due to genetic predisposition of certain things, require. Let me put this in order. Sometimes, let's say a kid has bone cancer, and the only way to save this kid is to transplant the bone that they have the cancer on, like cancer, so it's spreading. And so, the problem with this is that with the immune system requires the right genetics, and even with the right genetics, because right genetics provides right proteins provide right function, it's hidden from the kid's immune system, but it functions well inside the kid. However, it's a smart, fickle, evasive little shit sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, even when you have the right genetics, even when you have the right things that the immune system goes like, hey, I see you as me, you're good. It goes like, I see you like 98% of me, but you're still 2% off. You're at least dying a little bit, 2% every day. 2%, like 0.0002% organ that got transplanted, that a kid, goes away every day. And so,
bam.
what do you, like, you already, it's like you found matches, but the thing with the system is that the probability is very fucking.
Right. So how long is that? So the lifetime of that organ is going to be lower than the lifetime of an organ native to that person, no matter how good you have.
Mm-hmm.
It's gonna be lower.
They make it. Reed is a microbiologist. So, Reed, we are really in depth conversation. I'll have probably on this, but and like mark it down. But I have my two friends here. We have a history and poli sci major, with minors in music and mathematics, and then we have a neuroscience major with a minor in philosophy. And we're right now sort of discussing essentially research, regulation, and education, and sort of ethical dilemmas with this, with regards to biotechnology, with honestly mainly on technology comparisons. That's the most right base it off, but they're all with regards to biotechnology. And so right now I'm posing a question. Friend, his name Pero, who's a neuroscience. So I'm posing a question to him, being like, okay, so we're I'm asking him about essentially what do we do about transplants then, with his stance on regulation.
Yeah, in some sense, I want to address your point because you said, well, if we're going to put life above knowledge every time, then I have to get rid of the knife, my butter, because I could stab someone with it.
Exactly.
And I definitely see your point there in terms of, well, if I'm saying this on the big scale, you take a little scale example, and things start not making sense.
That's true. You have to look at the scale of it. Scale matters.
Look at the scale, and the scale does matter. But I still think that my argument makes sense because I'm not making an argument that you have to apply this in every decision that you have to create a new technology. I'm making the argument that you have to make that a value in society, as you pointed out.
Yes.
So if that's a value in society which guides action, obviously we're not going to have perfect adherence to that.
You'll have outliers.
And we're going to have cases in which exceptions are necessary and reasonable. But the fact that...
Gotta bet your bottom dollar that's what it is, though.
That's the rule. And then the exception will be, okay, now we have to have a discussion because this piece of knowledge might be so useful that we may have to risk some human lives in order to go after it. But right now, that situation is flipped. The rule is we're going to greenlight any research that might have serious positive benefits. And if you can propose research that it's going to have serious positive benefits, almost regardless of the means, that research can be greenlit by the necessary authority. And the exception to that rule is you don't have to make a case that the risk of your research justifies its benefit.
Mm.
Someone has to make a case against you that the risk of your research doesn't justify the cost of its benefit. It's the opposite situation. It's not you don't have the burden of proof as a researcher that your research is going to be is not going to be too risky to undertake. There are certain things where that may be the case because it's obviously dangerous to do certain kinds of research. But as we've seen with gain of function, sometimes even though it's obvious, even to lay people, that this might not be the best idea, the burden of proof is not on the people proposing the research. In fact, the only burden of proof put on them, other than preliminary risk analysis, if even that, containment procedures and things like that. How are we going to keep it in our lab? What's our plan for containing these things? I'm talking about the risk analysis of what will happen if things go wrong. That's what I consider true risk analysis. But doing preliminary risk analysis, you show what benefits can this research have, and you get it approved. That's the status quo right now. If we had a value in society which said we need to assess the risk on humans and sometimes accept that risk because we discuss it and we deem it necessary for the knowledge and the ability that we gain through technology, through advancement, through research. In this way, I'm not saying we can't break that rule. I'm saying it's not a rule right now. It just isn't a rule. People assume that it is, but clearly it's not. It's not like researchers don't care about human lives. That's also not what's going on, because there are ethical guidelines for a reason. And the guidelines essentially, the guidelines essentially say, guidelines on research essentially say, hey, the rule should be, if there's risk for human beings involved, we don't go there. But in the end, that almost always only applies to research that's done directly on human beings. Now we're doing research on things that can affect human beings. And I think that rule should be in place for those things too.
I mentioned that you have a lot of thoughts about the history of psychological research.
Yes, I definitely do.
Mm-hmm.
What the Germans did, and so the Nuremberg trials, they set the precedent for ethical medical guidelines. The Nuremberg Code is a set of research guidelines that was the first of its kind. It's been revised and tweaked and such. But like I said, that was the code I was referring to. It applies to direct research on human beings. It doesn't apply to viruses. You can kill as many viruses as you want. Nobody cares. It's like you just grow them in lab and then kill them off, and grow another batch, kill them off. You can't do that with humans. That's what the Nuremberg Code says. Don't go killing off humans in your laboratory. That's not a good idea.
Also, they're just not practical. Like research methods are not practical.
Yeah, but I'm saying this is a completely different order of ethical reasoning that's not being paid attention. There's a difference between putting a knife in someone's chest for research purposes and tweaking with a potentially world-ending virus in a laboratory. You're not doing anything that is directly harmful yet, right? And, well, directly harmful at all. But you are doing something that can have indirect implications that are orders of magnitude above what you could ever do by locking people up in a lab and starving. This research is more dangerous than direct human experimentation, and I'm not making a case for direct human experimentation of the negative kind at all. I'm saying if we fail to recognize the ethical choices we're making here, we are doing things that are worse than what the Nazis did by consequential ethical thinking. If you subscribe to some version of consequentialism, which is like you should determine whether or not to do an action based on the possible consequences of that action.
But that's not the grand narrative within most majority of society, though. See, the ideologies that you subscribe to are not the narrative of here in the United States for everyone, but that needs something like that, something ethical and something that deals with things like consequences and approaching things in a philosophical manner. That needs to be implemented into the societal level so that the up-and-coming chemist and up-and-coming biologist will already have that kind of ingrained in them. But then that's the moral dilemma of individualism. Are you, when you do that, you put another constraint on somebody, and then it comes up with the concept of greater good. It's outside of really anyone's realm of understanding, but it's a give and take. It's a give and take. It's just a matter of what we're willing to, take away from ourselves.
Okay, so you're saying like that's not really the ethical line of thinking.
How do we
have.
limit our own, I guess you could call it liberties, in order not to destroy ourselves?
Yeah.
And that kind of thinking, though, is dangerous because it can be turned around for really bad stuff.
Yeah, like the government can decide, wait a minute, our citizens are too free.
Yes.
They're too dangerous because they're free. Let's make them unfree and use the danger that they pose to themselves and others for that.
Oh, my head.
Yeah, so I think you're right about the standard ethical thinking people engage in, because it's not consequentialist as I've said
as much.
It's more deontological, which is an action is either good or bad based on like certain actions are good or bad based on ethical rule, like killing a human being always bad, or hitting someone is always bad. There are certain rules, and the rules are more complicated than that. But certain actions are always bad, certain actions are always good, regardless of their consequence. It's a moral code kind of way of thinking, rather than determining the moral stature of actions by their consequences they may or may not have. There are these two opposing views, and then there's also virtue ethics, which is kind of a branch of deontological thinking, which is basically some actions contribute to character development of virtues, and some actions contribute to character development of vices, and vices lead to bad outcomes, and virtues lead to good outcomes. So there are lots of different ethical approaches to take with this. I'm saying that the consequentialist viewpoint predicts the outcomes before they happen. And the deontological view doesn't.
We do think about consequences and things like that. We do. That's what regulation's for. That's what.
But you don't make
this whole thing
decisions.
is all about,
you don't make decisions based on that.
But we still have problems
if you're under a
though.
deontological framework, because then you go, well, curing things is good. Let's approve the research, which is exactly that's a deontological way of thinking. It's like, well, here's a good that we could do. It would be bad not to do it, because the rules say that good things are good and bad things are bad. This is not a direct bad thing, so we have to approve it. We have to say yes to it.
Problem is that yes, it's good, but it also could be bad. Reversing the meme,
right?
And when you do that, do we just nip it in the bud and say no, we're not going to do it, or do we tempt fate and say, well, think about the implications? It could be incredible. We could fix everything. Do we do that or do we not? I would never be able to make that decision. I could not do it. Too many implications.
Well, I've
we already have
proposed.
that in place. Considering, so I put this realistic situation because
Sure.
so all that we talked about, they had historical that were realistic, and then again, sort of
A lot of it's hypothetical,
Yes.
and so
but a lot of it's a reality.
it is too.
Yeah.
The hypotheticals exist
because of the reality.
Because of the reality.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
What else are we making our predictions off?
right. So sort of what I
Let's
mean
make
by
humans immune to everything. Boom. Case solved.
How are we gonna make humans immune to nuclear weapons too?
You know what? We'll figure it out.
I don't think we'd be very cute if we were immune to nuclear
Hey,
weapons.
I
think because we're adorable because we're so squishy, you know. If giants showed up, we're screwed.
I'm cutting out
but
now. Yeah. So
I think
the
that-
mic has a pattern, probably something similar to this.
Is it able to change patterns? My mic.
We can be
changes.
friends. Let's huddle up. There we go.
I've been waiting for this my whole life.
Oh my god. So
He's
yeah.
been waiting for me to make the move
Oh
forever.
yeah. I'm too
Still
afraid to
waiting.
say it.
someone's got to be the bottom.
All right.
So I don't know. So I put in realistic situations here, but that's more so to be like, okay, like we can have all these thoughts, and yet I can see that some of our thoughts here do not correlate with our current. Some of them do.
Mm.
COVID, right?
Mm.
However, there has been this research going into like funded by the government and such in research institutions, and nothing exactly has come like on the societal bad.
Well, except COVID.
So, and I mean by that though, it's that in like medical field.
Yeah.
is that
No, for sure. But our tools are getting more powerful all the time.
they're getting
And
more powerful
you're
and-
right. We're
and
we,
less
sh-
and like
we are kind of
more cost efficient.
catastrophizing it, and your point is well taken.
Yeah.
We are catastrophizing this,
Mhm.
but
Oh,
when
is it?
you're
that's the joy. though.
yes, that
That's
is the joy in it. But I'm
Mm.
also saying it's not just a joy of the conversation
It is a serious
that's creating
consideration.
that
Mm.
But it's not just the fact that
Yes.
it's fun to
No,
talk
I'm
about
aware.
worst
I'm
case
just like-
scenarios.
Yeah.
I think worst
the way you
case
said it.
scenarios
Mm.
should be a part of the fundamental calculation. Best case scenarios should be part of the fundamental
Yes.
calculation.
Mhm.
The moment you ignore any of those, you're not running the calculation properly.
Mhm.
So you said, well, whether we should tempt fate for the progress of humanity and risk annihilation or not do that is a decision that you wouldn't be able to make. And I agree, it's a very weighty decision. But I've proposed a heuristic for making these decisions. Given that this kind of research is probably not going to be our only path towards this knowledge, it might be the fastest and most expedient way towards knowledge of viruses to change their genetic code, see what happens. Then we're going to get direct knowledge of what a specific change to a genome does
Just
to the function and life of a
expand that too.
virus.
I'll be right back.
just to expand that too.
Sure.
Like it doesn't even necessarily need to be viruses as well. It just could be pathogens.
Yeah, pathogens.
Pathogens. in
It
general.
could be nuclear research. I'm using it as an example for the broad concept here.
Mhm.
If we have a form of research that we could be engaged in that has the potential cost of annihilation, I propose the heuristic that we do not go down that
Mhm.
route. We just
Mhm.
don't,
Right.
because it's not going to be our only opportunity to gain that kind of knowledge, whatever kind of knowledge that might be.
Mhm.
It might be the best one we have right now, but who's to say? Maybe we green light something like gain of function research, and then 5 years from that point, we
Mhm.
discover that there's this alternative research method that can yield the same kind of knowledge about viruses and the way they develop and the way they function. Maybe there's some really cool protein
I agree,
tracking
starting-
technology, or
Mhm.
maybe AI makes a breakthrough and we can simulate the folding of protein, for instance, which is still something that's computationally explosive, so we can't do it.
Mhm.
There are certain breakthroughs that are possible, which don't have the downside of possible annihilation. It's not like that's all research. It's a very, very, very small proportion of research.
Mhm.
It's basically research on infectious diseases
Mhm.
and nuclear explosions and maybe to some degree things I don't know about that
Definitely
might be very
engineering.
dangerous.
Definitely.
Yes,
in-
there's engineering research
Mhm.
that has potential to do this.
It's like
Space flight engineering that has potential to do this.
Most of
because
this
if
really
we're trying to
applies-
warp space time, do we really want to do that?
Yeah, it's
we
like-
we really want to try.
basically.
I don't know what the cost of that is.
Yeah. So heck, look at that. So basically, I feel like a whole lot of this really mainly applies to when you're when you're studying a little bit into sort of what is it, outfield sort of, as you can go outfield, pick up things and back, and that goes back to historical. Where it's like you explore out and you bring disease with you, and that disease kills everything because that system was not like adapted towards
Yeah.
that other. So there's also that part of it too. So it's like outfield research and engineering. So
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
honestly, this applies a whole lot to me. I'm a synthetic biologist. I want to be a synthetic biologist.
Yeah.
This applies a lot to me.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
by even thinking about these things, you've already taken the you've taken the vaccine against them, to use a terrible analogy at the point.
That's
Yes.
an interesting. Yeah, I would love to hear the questions from Reed, because he's an actual like.
Should they be destroyed or
microbiologist.
kept in storage?
So we'll go up right here.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, smallpox research. I read your previous comment about gain of function research as well. I gave the whole timeline of the NIH banning that research in 2014, and then on December 19th of 2017, they gave it the green light, and they put a pause on it during the pandemic because they realized that once the lab leak theory was more or less accepted, they realized we should put a pause on these things until things die down. But they've resumed that kind of research now, and you're right, there are plenty of people arguing against gain of function research. I would certainly be on that side of that argument, because the fundamental thing I've been saying here is that if the cost of a gain is the cost of a research path, no matter what the gain is, if the cost of that research path is potentially annihilation, we should not be going down that research path. So to apply that heuristic to smallpox research, it depends on how dangerous smallpox is. Would a smallpox outbreak create annihilations, complete annihilation? I think we'd say no, it doesn't. Is it one of those things that comes pretty darn close? Yes. Especially if you're doing, for instance, let's say someone proposed gain of function research on smallpox, on the smallpox virus, and so they're giving smallpox artificially more functionality. They're making it more dangerous so that they can see what a worst case scenario would do and how to stop it, let's say. And
viewers here is a microbiologist. I think no, he's doing undergrad in microbiology. So
and the best thing, and let's say
I
that
like these questions.
the possible benefits of this research are immense. We would perhaps we would cure some of the most infectious diseases through this research, hypothetically, let's say. In this hypothetical situation, there has to be a discussion, and it can't be a fiat decision. That's not what my heuristic is for. My heuristic is only saying a hard no to cases where the possible downside is annihilation. If that is a possible downside, we don't go there by fiat. It draws a line there. But if the possible downside is anything less than that, then you have a discussion. But you have a discussion based on consequentialist ethics, which means that we look at the possible outcomes if ignorance or negligence allows the worst case scenario to occur. So for smallpox, that would be a breach of smallpox containment. If there's a live smallpox sample and it gets out, what would the consequences be? Research obviously gives precautions towards that, but there's still a probability of it happening, because you're putting these things out into real world research laboratories and they don't always contain things. The leak theory might still be it's not a decided thing.
It isn't confirmed by any means.
It's not confirmed, and I didn't say
well,
it was confirmed.
It's not confirmed to the public.
It's widely accepted to some degree, and we'll never have a clear answer on that because the CDC hasn't investigated, which it really should have, and too scared of trying to do that, in my opinion. But we're never going to get a clear answer on that, so we have to work on some sort of working hypothesis. We have to have some model for what happened. I don't buy that people picked this up from a bat in a market where they weren't selling bats at the time, because that's been confirmed. So the initial story is false. That doesn't mean other theories are true, but the initial theory is false, and we know that.
My bad.
And the fact that there was a virology lab in Wuhan doing gain of function research on bad coronaviruses just seems like too much of a coincidence. It seems like too much of a coincidence that a virus that seems to have overcome some evolutionary challenges in the way it was able to spread just randomly popped up as a mutation in the same city where there's a lab like this. So this is why people believe in this theory. Obviously, there's no way to confirm it. But at the same time, it's a better working hypothesis than any I've heard. You have another one, but I'm very interested in what it is, because I like to play these things out against each other and say which one would have predicted best what's actually happening.
What are your opinions on this? I'm curious, Reed.
I am curious, but to finish my point about the smallpox containment thing, and possible future research with smallpox, the conversation that has to be had, is not one of what are the benefits that could be gained from this research. That's the wrong conversation in my mind. The conversation has to be a lot more, well, if you'd like, pessimistic than that, but for me, it's more realistic than that. The conversation has to be about that, yes, but also about what happens if the negligence and the ignorance allows the worst case scenario. What does that look like? What happens if our competence and our skill and our wonderful research program turns out the results that it's trying to attain? What's that scenario look like? And both of those things have some probability. We can't really know what that probability is, but we have to make our decisions based on our predictions in both of those areas. Otherwise, we're making foolish decisions.
If I can respond to Reed real quick.
Yeah.
So with the theory, I'll give an uneducated guess because I'm no expert by any means. I think you're right. I think a lot of it I think it came from a lab, much in the same way we have our own form of engineered, or what I like to call extended viruses, here in the States, and I think it found its way to an animal, and I agree with the theory of a raccoon, most likely, and then found its way into some sort of market, which found its way into humans. That's common with many viruses throughout history, unless you're a conspiracy theorist, and you can go wherever you want with that, but I agree. And I think that's quite valid.
Yeah, no, I have heard of the animal source theory for COVID, and I'm not a biologist, so
I don't think it originated though in an animal. I think it somehow found its way to animals. I'm not exactly sure how they travel, but I do think it came from a lab.
Yeah, that's not out of the question too. But I'm a narrative, so I'm what you might call a narrative psychologist in some sense. The psychological the psychological school I subscribe to, narrative, psychoanalytic part of that side of things, and so I look at what would cause China's official response to the virus appearing in a city with a virology lab. What would cause the official story to be, this virus came from a bat, we know how it happened in the wet market in Wuhan, there was improper hygiene related to a bat, and it jumped from the animal to a human, and that's how it happened, and then that story turns out to be false. But then it's not like you can ignore the story. You have to ask, why that story, if it was false, presuming that the people telling that story knew it to be false, right? Because if the people who were telling that story knew it to be false when they were telling it, what kind of knowledge, like if they knew that story was false, perhaps they knew something about the truth. If they knew something about the truth, perhaps it was easier for them to tell a half-truth than a lie.
They needed to come up with some story.
But why that one? Why a bat? Why a wet market? Why improper health precautions? And that
in 50 years, I'm sure we'll be able to understand it then. But right now, it's far too fresh in politics, and there is perhaps a political motive to it. But that is kind of besides the point of why they're doing it. We need to attack the why it happened, not what they're coming up with afterwards, because it happened. however you want to blame it, that's fine.
Yeah.
But because it happened,
It's beside the point now.
that is, yeah, it's unfortunately too late, and we need to figure out how to prevent such things by looking within, looking internally.
Mm-hmm. So there's this idea of how to ethically approach this research, obviously in terms of regulation and in terms of what do we approve, what do we not approve. And that goes back all the way towards to the societal level, which you've pointed out.
Yes.
By the way, I actually have a whole other corporation kind of perspective. Here's the thing. The way you distribute these things in the first place is business. Sending them out inside. And that's honestly, I feel like getting it sort of segregating off, but it doesn't incorporate the whole education versus regulation versus biotech.
Yeah.
So when you have distribution of stuff, right? I'm going off some other segment, but yeah.
Those are both not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. So, just like with regards to regulation, what is responsibility? Like, what responsibilities of the corporation? So, what do they incorporate as a trademark secrets or something? I gotta costs, licensing.
And I don't like trademark. I don't like hiding knowledge from people, because I think that that's a solution that's doomed to fail in the long run. Because if you're regulating information, we live in the information age.
Yeah.
That information will come out. Governments have tried to hide information from citizens before. Sooner or later, that information comes out.
Right.
I'm
I
sure the
mentioned that.
governments are hiding information right now, but I'm sure that in 50 years, we're probably going to know most of it.
50 to 100 years. I can actually personally, from an archivist standpoint, because I work in archives and will be working more this summer on it. There's 100-year gap in a timestamp that the government puts on certain documents, and even to the smallest things like a college. Here at this college, for example, yeah, there's 100-year stamp where they say this cannot be opened and you can't see this until 100 years later, and there are problems with that. But sooner or later, things do come to light, and it happens.
But I'm saying, that's regulating that is different from regulating research, because if you don't do the research, it's not like you do the research secretly and don't publish the results for 100 years.
No,
You haven't walked that
Unfortunately,
road.
that is some case. Usually, with like are really smart, but also nerd lives.
Oh.
I know. Hey, archival work is fun. I
Yeah.
enjoy my other major. Hey, yeah. Wait, Reed, what was your other major again? I know you were another major. I think religious studies.
Oh.
Religious studies. Yeah. So yeah, he enjoys this stuff
All
a
right.
whole lot.
He's on the same page. I like this guy.
Yeah. Oh man, I enjoy the people that have my chat, dude.
Yeah, that
Just
sounds
come
like,
across, like,
sound like a bunch of fun, actually. I like it.
yeah. So, yeah. You're going on about regulating research. I just brought up the.
Well, that connects back to the other point we made about ethics.
Right.
How can we regulate things? Or do you think it's better to just have a grand narrative that you install in society so that those kinds of things, every individual has this idea, this sense of, I'm taking it upon myself for the grand narrative. But then again, like I said earlier, it attacks liberties and individualism, etc. But then it's the idea of pursuing the greater good.
Okay, so let's take it to the societal level for a bit.
Yeah.
And
That's
say,
correct, yeah.
because I think that's going to be a really interesting discussion.
Hmm?
If we start regulating the accessibility to research and knowledge and certain paths of curiosity, we are essentially putting ourselves in the boots of the Inquisition. Like, oh, you're curious about, the fact that the Earth might be going around the sun instead of the other way around, well, we're gonna burn you.
Yeah.
You know, it can get to there. It can get to that place. We've been there
You
before.
never expect it.
Now I'm taking it to an extreme to make a bit of a point about taking it to the margin to make a point about the average here.
Right.
Because the average is probably not going to be so extreme. I don't think we're going to burn people at the stake for using genetic alteration kits.
No.
We might hit them with a hefty fine, though.
Mhm.
And if someone does
We'll
have...
years in jail just to be safe too.
Right.
Yeah.
If someone does have a
Mhm.
idea with one of the that requires one of these and doesn't have the kind of, well, even if it does have kind of possible negative repercussions, I'm going to play devil's advocate against my own stance here. Let's say we have a biological genius on our hand. This person has an idea that they have a very, very, very strong scientific sense, will solve a major problem, and they know how to go about it, and they know how to reduce the risks practically zero, even though the risk of something going wildly wrong always exists. Best case scenario, right? Should they have the right to use a kit like this? You know, that's a very difficult question, because the kit in itself is like the ability to make an atomic bomb. You haven't made the thing yet. But if you give people the ability to do so and you give them enough time, one of them's going to do it.
Mhm. It's like you have a cooking recipe out also online. It's like, okay, well, here's the things, and you got the materials too in your kitchen. And in this case, your kitchen's a little box.
Right. Someone's going to cook it up.
Mhm.
And there's so you say, well, we could limit the ability of people to use these kits regardless of that possibility. Some benevolent genius coming up with a credible solution, which has happened many times and is generally the way science progresses.
Mhm.
Some benevolent genius does something fairly risky with the scientific tools at our disposal and finds something that changes the world. That's how science happens in a lot of cases. Now, in some cases, that the risk isn't there. They just stumble across something that's, wow.
And we do have ways of, realistically speaking, we do have ways of, we have awesome
Exactly.
in vitro, in vivo stuff. It's sort of first screen
I
Well,
see
yeah,
us
that's
drifting
the
away
sense
from
of
the
scale.
societal level.
building. Yeah, that's the
That's about-
comparison. It's not
yeah.
the actual, like, we're not making
yes.
this literal.
No,
No,
that,
sure.
there's nuance to this, and
Definitely.
and the scale is definitely something taken into consideration.
But I think the point is more like the whole monkeys on the typewriter thing, where if you put an infinite amount of monkeys on an infinite amount of typewriters, they'll eventually write every book in the library, just because of the virtue of nature of the problem you're dealing with. That infinity is a weird thing, but in this case, human curiosity is the weird thing we're dealing with. If you give someone the ability to express their curiosity through a specific means, you provide them a means for doing that, it only takes one very interested and driven person to do that. What about
well, that's guidelines.
Okay, yes, that's guidelines. Okay, so this was the point I brought up earlier between the two ethical viewpoints, deontological viewpoints or consequentialist viewpoints. So this is the difference. Deontological viewpoints are guidelines. They are what we have now. They're the Nuremberg Code. They are the American Psychological Association's guidelines for psychological practice,
Agreed.
which are going to apply to me one day as a practicing psychologist. These are guidelines. They are based on rules, very concrete. Do I think they're a good thing? Absolutely. I think we need them. Do I think that they are sufficient for telling us which research we can do and which research we cannot? No. I think the only thing that can provide us with that is an informed dialogue of experts that don't make blind decisions based on guidelines, but rather make decisions with the guidelines in mind based on a discussion that they have in the room. I'm essentially arguing for a debate framework under consequentialist ethics for the decision making in research, because it's the most strict form of ethical consideration. It's more strict than deontological, rule-based systems of making decisions. In a deontological,
IRBs, exactly.
Yep.
and things like human subject
Yeah.
testing boards.
We
Yes,
had mentioned
exactly.
that about
Yes.
the Nuremberg.
But most of these IRB boards, most of these ethical boards, and there are definitely exceptions to this, but a lot of the boards of ethics, especially at a higher levels, they're dealing with, does this research tick certain boxes? Does it violate any of the ethical guidelines? That's what the ethical board is there to do. They're there to compare the piece of proposed research with the guidelines that already exist, and as long as it doesn't violate any of those guidelines, it gets the green light. If they determine that it does, they're acting like judges. They're acting like they're acting like Supreme Court judges. What Supreme Court judges do is they do not, to the degree that they're doing their job, they don't pass personal judgment on the ethical nature of the case. Their job is essentially interpretation. They interpret the law as it stands against the facts of the case, and a human has to do this job. They determine whether the facts of the case have violated the laws as they stand, and they give a judgment based on that. And it works most of the time. But in terms of research, I think that being the norm, and ethical boards that actually make their decisions based on the conversation that happened in the room, even if the piece of research does not directly or indirectly violate any of the guidelines present. Right? I'm saying boards like that are more rare than they should be. That should be the rule, not the exception. I'm saying general guidelines are great. There should be guidelines that if you violate them, the research is out. For me, I've already proposed one of those guidelines. If the cost of research is potential annihilation for the human race, we should do that research. That's a guideline. It's not a consequential, and it's based on consequentialist thinking, but it's still a guideline. So if I was part of an ethics board, that was a guideline we were using, and a piece of research came across my table, and it proposed research that had that possible outcome, then we could just say no. But if I propose more or less a two-stage process, one that looks like what we're doing now, passes a review board where people are just checking it against the guidelines as they stand, and if it passes that, then it goes to a discussion board, which is more or less how laws are made. How they're supposed to be made. It doesn't always work out this way because of lobbying, political strife, and all of that. But in the ideal situation, the House of Representatives actually talk about the legislation in question and discuss its benefits and discuss its costs and say, even though this doesn't violate any guidelines that we've set for legislation, that's why it's gotten this far, let's discuss whether or not this will get us further than it will set us back.
Yeah. Okay. That was a whole lot.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to give a very precise answer.
I got you. It's just that, so, got kind of close here.
Sure.
Because it's a whole lot going for our
Well, we'll have to continue the conversation for another time.
Sure, if you guys are up.
Absolutely.
Awesome, yeah, no. It's like...
I agree.
Yeah. So
I've had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. Fun. For the people who kind of came late, sorry you got thrown the whole ocean depth. But
Yeah, but I think you could have picked up what the conversation was more or less about.
Yeah, well,
talk about maybe. So,
not to negate the importance of the question.
What's that?
I said not to negate the importance of the question.
Just more confidentiality.
Yep. If you have a Discord, you can join mine.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do.
Maddie, let me give you guys my Discord. If you guys want to continue on there. You have a Discord you can join, and we could all get there, and we could all talk about it a bit more. There, I have to sort of end stream. I have to end stream
You have
because
a girlfriend too. Shut up.
I know, but aw, cute.
I have to end stream because people are getting upset with how I'm putting this up. But thank you all for joining me. I need to find someone. Thank you too for joining.
Yeah,
This-
absolutely.
this
We'll
is
be here
absolutely
again.
fun. And I think we should also. I am definitely thinking about turning the podcast
Yeah.
section. I
I
have
think that's appropriate.
topics that I think are interesting. So one of them is nuanced views on intelligence. I recently read
Right.
that book, and that book proposed a lot of really, proposed a pretty interesting. I've talked about this before. I basically hosted a club, an impromptu book club about this. But
Ungifted by Scott Barry Kaufman. Kaufman's great.
Hoffman is amazing.
I agree.
Yeah, you can read it. You can send that in my Discord. I open that up. But yeah, so I'm gonna find someone to raid or chat. If you can find me someone to raid, that'd be amazing. But yeah,
Email me your Discord. I'm gonna join. But you can do that after.
just wanna-
But hey, it's a fantastic conversation. I think we
Awesome.
covered a lot of ground.
covered a lot of.
I agree.
And we talked about specific cases, worst case scenario cases, societal stuff, specific things. I'd love to talk about the psychological aspect of all this, but we didn't get into that. Maybe next conversation. And I also want to talk on a related note about AI research, because it's kind of facing similar dilemmas with the emergence of generalized artificial intelligence. Actual
Yeah.
problem solving, creative AI machines that are, these problems are being solved and they're being implemented. And now quantum computing is well on its way. Lots of stuff to talk about, but
Definitely.
maybe another time.
That'd be so
Oh,
interesting.
quantum
to hear
computing
about.
could lead to lots of
So-
cool things.
Anyways, so yeah, I have to raid someone. Let's go raid
Terrifying
Self Science.